Natalia. So, protein is another huge topic that's discussed everywhere, and I have this conversation with people. I feel like every day someone is concerned about their protein intake when they switch to eating life generating foods. And then there's the concern about their children not getting their protein to develop, which is a completely different concern. It's the maternal instinct.
Right, or the maternal programming. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's the wild mother, and then there's the programmed mother, and they often do find themselves at odds. So, a few things. We have all our questions answered when we look to nature, and when we see a 500-pound gorilla that's living on greens. We see the water buffalo. We see the elephant. The woolly mammoth. Was he a vegetarian? I don't know. We can look that up. He was. It sounds like he probably would have been. Okay, so if we see in nature these enormous, powerful. I mean, beast sounds a bit harsh because they are like so beautiful and amazing. But these animals that are growing up to be big and strong on leafy greens, berries, that sort of thing. Why do we suddenly panic when we think about children not growing bones? And I mean the skeletal frames, the skeletal muscular frames on these animals are enormous. Why do we panic when children are concerned? I think it's a lot. It's everything to do with the protein myth, the protein lie, if we want to be that abrasive. It's a programming, and it's so deep. It's so much about a combination of misguided understanding about how the protein forms these substances. The animal flesh protein forms bone and flesh, and I think there's also the concern around the if we get into like the paleontological argument, if that's a word, paleontology, that are the history of man, that our brains became what they are today because we started to eat animal protein, and that's theoretical. That it doesn't necessarily coincide. It coincides chronologically with our intake. Possibly. There's so many stories. There's so many things that are unfounded or we're unsure about. But what we do know is that that protein consumption does so much damage. And not only does it damages every layer of our being. It damages our, first of all, it does damage our brains because we wind up with deposits of protein in the brain, which we see later in life as Alzheimer's. It damages our endocrine system because it messes with the hormone levels. It increases testosterone greatly in the body, and we know it makes men aggressive who take in too much testosterone, who take in too many animal products. We know that people become much more peaceful when they're vegetarian. We know that that the way human beings consume flesh today, the quantities with which they consume flesh, deteriorate their systems. We think people are living to a ripe old age. I should say the program tells us that people are living to a ripe old age, when in fact our bodies are potentially designed to live far longer. Again, lots of conflicting information. You could call it disinformation, information that directly undermines the truth of who we are and what we are. We know that the indigenous people lived on a great variety of foods based on where they were based. Again, we always look to nature. If we follow indigenous peoples, they were not eating meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Meat was something that they only took when they actually had the utmost need for it. So in very, very cold climates where they couldn't grow things, then they would, they'd partake, or they would, kill a buck or a woolly mammoth or one of these things to survive. But they would use it thoroughly. Their digestive systems were pure. They had the fortitude to break this kind of thing down, and did not leave kind of waste behind that it leaves in human beings today who consume it. And we know that we're not strictly carnivorous because we have a very long intestinal tract. And carnivorous animals have a short intestinal tract, and their teeth are different to ours. We know that we have teeth designed for chewing vegetables. So there's so many things in question. There's our long digestive tract. There's the fact that these foods are not eaten. That we're taking way more than we need from the earth. We don't have the intestinal fortitude to break down so much animal protein, and we know that people who don't consume animal protein are so much better off. They're healthier. They're more peaceful. They're generally more well balanced. So not to say that flesh foods can't have a place in an adult or child's life. Simply that there shouldn't be all this fear around raising children in a wise, low to no animal flesh content dietetic way. In fact, it should be the opposite. It should, again though, we can we look to nature in history, we look to nature in the wild, we look to nature in indigenous peoples, and we look to the best sort of sample of nature today, which is in our own systems. So just simply by taking on a low to no animal flesh diet for your child, watch them, see how they do. We never want to just look in a book or take an authority's word for anything anyway. If we're in tune parents, we're observing our child. Is our child alert? Are they playful? Are they quick to laugh? Are they in good humor? Are they growing well? There would be obvious signs if a child was deficient in something as gross, I mean that literally and figuratively, as animal flesh. So, but if there is fear around it, then there's going to be fear at large. So the fear has to come out of it, hopefully. But if there is fear around it, then maybe you want to just compensate for that fear by not going for the red meat and chicken and some of the more obvious offenders today, simply not just because they're so hard to digest, but because of the way they're being reared. And there are so many dangers just in taking in animal flesh today, because what you're really taking in, is the biomass of the flesh of these animals that are going to hold the antibiotics, the hormones, the GMO corn they were fed, and and the pain of being killed and the pain of being raised the way they're being raised. And then instead, maybe do organic free-range eggs, which are so much easier for a child to digest. Instead, maybe do the best quality wild fish you can find. There are alternatives. The other thing that people need to keep in mind is that when we talk about protein, people are so ingrained. The animal flesh protein is so deeply ingrained in people that they think it has to come from a concentrated protein source, as opposed to the amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, being received from various plant foods, on a continuous basis. Of course, the other argument that comes up then with that is, well, what about soy foods? And because if people who don't do that, they think, well, I'm doing plenty of soy, so that's okay, or I'm going to do soy instead, when, of course, as we know, soy is so gluey that any potential amino acids that soy could have, any benefits that soy could have, theoretically, are offset by the fact that it's too estrogenic, dense, and gluey. So, and again, watch your child. There is the children who are given soy foods exhibit symptoms. Children who are given animal flesh foods exhibit symptoms. Children who are given plant foods exclusively and abundantly, or abundantly even if not exclusively, don't tend to show symptoms. If they do, they're very mild. So if you don't have mucus-forming things coming in, you're not going to wind up with a mucousy child. If there's, animal proteins aren't going in the form of animal flesh or milk, you're not going to have that kind of mucus. Of course, that means you also have to remove the packaged foods because they're also mucus forming. But as I said, this has to be an educated approach. There are plenty of people who embrace. It could be that they're going something free. They're going gluten free. They're going animal flesh free. They're going. They can get into a myopic headspace around one particular category of food that they're removing. Meanwhile, there are so many gross offenders within the spectrum that they're eating. So it's a matter of carefully just discerning if you're going to remove flesh foods because they're potentially harmful to the body, then you have to remove the other things that are potentially harmful to the body too, and create a centerpiece of substances that are life-generating, and then you can pretty much guarantee a successful experiment.
While we're on the topic, do you want to touch on calcium in milk?
Yes, it's very, very interconnected. Thank you for...
and mucus?
Yeah, and mucus, yeah. Well, one thing to keep in mind, again, we'll go back to the animals and what strong bones they have without... Well, first of all, the animals in nature build their strong bones drinking their mother's milk. And their mother's milk is not toxic milk. Their mother's milk is good milk. So that's...
it's grass-fed.
It's organic grass-fed. Or I suppose, historically has been. Today it's kind of anybody's guess what anything is. But so we start with good, healthy mother's milk. And they're not fed the milk of another species. And they're not fed milk after weaning age. So what do? We give them, if you're lucky enough to be breastfed or to breastfeed your baby, that's wonderful, but there's probably a lot of toxins in your breast milk. Not just because you may not be eating ideally, but that the environmental pollution goes into your bloodstream, it comes up in the breast milk. And I'm sure even someone like me who's fastidious dietetically, living in New York City, I'm sure there are levels of lead and mercury and crazy estrogenic things coming up in my breast milk. But, you do as much as you can to offset. So, just to throw myself into the ring with every other person because we're all interconnected living on this planet. So what do? We give them, milk of another species way beyond weaning age that has tons of chemicals, antibiotics, and scary stuff in it. And it's of a species whose casein molecule is much bigger than ours. So it's very hard for them to digest. So then we wind up, the more we add insult to injury by putting harmful substances in and continuing to do that after the intestine has already become full, and our channels are becoming compromised with excessive mucus from what's going in and the way the body creates mucus from these offenders because it's gone in. So it's the mucus forming foods. They have their own mucus-like quality as they come in. Then the body creates this mucoid plaque to protect the body from them. It's like armor, and that accumulates. And of course, with every blockage where we have stagnation, we have bacterial growth. So if that's accumulating, then it's no surprise that in that accumulation come all these other symptoms, these other expressions of imbalance: bronchitis, sinusitis, pneumonia, asthma, your average colds and flus. The green gook that comes up, that's all bacteria laid, but and you can see that it's the mucoid plaque. It's very sticky, and that sticky quality is, imagine in the body that stickiness prevents flow, and if we prevent flow, suddenly we have the life deterioration cycle, which is what we are, which is life deterioration cycle, and everything from the start of it to the finish of it is symptoms becoming incrementally more intense. So you start out with the colds and flus, wind up later with the bronchitis and the pneumonia, and then down the road, you have liver failure. You have, what's that when people need not the asthma, but the respirator when you get much older. But it basically leads to all these more intensified renditions of the original illness.
Right.
So.
Yeah. be warned.
Yeah, but just to tighten up the question you'd asked to pose is that what we want to do is enable our cells, give our cells, or the atoms at the very subatomics, um, give the atoms what they need to manifest healthy cells, so we can have so they can deliver what needs to be given to create healthy bone tissue, etc. And the big thing to remember is that when we're talking about calcium, we're talking about a very alkaline mineral. So if we've identified the calcium quotient in the bone, and that as being the significant thing we need to contribute to, then anything that's acidic is going to leach calcium from our bone. The deterioration of our bones and the lack of the ability of the bone to grow big and strong is not for lack of taking enough milk or calcium supplements. It's because we take in too many acidic substances that leach, literally pull the alkalinity out of the bone. And it does this because the body's, this is an interesting point, so hang on with me for one more thing. The body's always trying to maintain homeostasis. So when we talk about blood alkalinity, 7.4 being slightly alkaline, it needs to stay at that range, 7.2 to 7.4, for the body to be in homeostasis, so everything else can work, because the blood can't deliver acidic blood to the organs, or the organs start to deteriorate, which is what we see as a precursor of cancer. So in order to offset that, so that the blood can maintain this harmony, so the rest of the body can benefit, it goes and gets the alkaline to offset that acidity from somewhere that it can live without. It can live. Your body can live without bone. You can live without bone. You can live without nails, eyes, teeth, all these things, but you can't live without your vital organs. So in its way of adapting, of surviving, it says, okay, well, I've got to somehow keep this blood alkaline. Where can I get alkalinity from? Oh, I've got this storehouse of bone. But what's happening is it's like mining the bones. So, we all want to walk around with gold necklaces on. Well, that's got to come from somewhere. Is it, the bone gets leached, it gets weakened. And I think there is a great analogy to be made, but I won't harp on about it here, about the pulling gold stores from the earth, because I think there's a very important reason that the gold stores are what they were in the earth, and it sets off a terrible imbalance there as well. But that's why the bones, that's why kids' bones don't grow strong, because of lack of alkalinity and too much acidity, and that's why we have so much osteoporosis in the Western world. And there is no amount of milk you can drink, calcium supplements you can take, that will put that back into the body, because it has to be assimilated in a natural way. It can't just be, well, we've formulated this calcium in the laboratory and the body's going to it would be like saying in a steel building, we're just going to slap some steel on the side and it's going to be strong. It has to be integrated in an organic way.
But isn't there just as easy of an answer?
Oh, it's a super easy answer. Yeah. Yeah. Share this with, enlighten us all on it.
There's so much calcium in greens. Have your juice, right?
Have your juice, right? I love it. Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
it's just as simple, if not simpler, because it's tasty and you're not swallowing a dry pill. I find that to be so repulsive. As a kid even, I just hated that feeling. So to have an answer like that where I can drink my green lemonade, and as a kid, you're not worried about putting fruit in there, so you can have a fruity green drink. Mm-hmm. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Throw away your calcium supplements. You really just don't need them.
Yeah, absolutely true. And if kids realized, I think that they are losing their power through these acidic substances, and they can gain their power through alkaline substances, they would probably be more motivated. It also brings up, of course, the big subject of how this stuff is marketed to kids and how it undermines their future. Because it's enticing. If we're easily tempted as adults, and kids are easily tempted by these things, and so it's up to us as their big sisters and moms, aunts, grandmothers, uncles, fathers, grandfathers, to show them how they can take hold of their own health and enjoy a glass of green juice. Why should that be the domain solely of adults. Kids actually love it. And
yeah, your baby loves it.
Yeah.
Every time I come around my green juice, she reaches for it. She knows.
Yeah, yeah,